In order to understand the connection between elite power and inequality, we must first answer why should elite networks have any effect on inequality in the first place? And if there is a relationship, how does it explain the cyclical nature of inequality? To answer these questions, we need to go back in time, way back, like during the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago. Time for a lesson in history. The agricultural revolution is when the first food surpluses were being made, the initial form of wealth, creating opportunities for other members of the tribe to become soldiers, bureaucrats, and rulers. Better organization and greater production meant growth of early populations, encouraging sedentary lifestyle as opposed to hunter-gatherers, which meant larger and denser societies. That was the starting point for both politics and religion. Both were necessary to create cooperation between individuals in larger societies. Rulers, initially the strongest members of a tribe, used armies to protect food surpluses. First armies also meant gradual development of technology for warfare, useful for further conquest of new territories. But the rulers also had to cement their legitimacy by assigning themselves divine characteristics, which is where religion comes in as the first form of elite propaganda. How can you overthrow someone if he's a descendant of the gods? So this initial wealth that our ancestors created, the first food surpluses, enabled the gradual creation of first hierarchical power structures, and hence the first proto-states with rulers, military, and religion. Proto-states were important as they also provided protection against theft and pillage from outsiders, the so-called roving bandits. This is Mansur Olson's theory. Early societies chose to have a certainty of a stationary bandit, to whom they willingly paid for protection, hint taxes, over the uncertainty of a roving bandit. So they gave more powers to the stationary bandit. Sound familiar? This is how we got the original 1%. The rulers, the religious leaders, and the leaders of the military became the first elites of a society, in charge of all distribution and operating within a strong, hierarchical, autocratic order. As proto-states expanded to the first empires, like the Sumerian, Egyptian, Akkadian, Assyrian, Persian, Chinese dynasties, and later even more powerful states like the Roman Republic and Roman Empire, this became the dominant social order, a ruling elite at the top of wealth distribution, determining all ownership rights over land and property. Therefore, the initial OG source of wealth inequality happened as a consequence of political inequality, as a consequence of our self-imposed hierarchical order. How could one become rich in such an order? Either you were born lucky to be part of the ruling elite, or you had to engage in conquest, hoping you can keep the pillage afterwards. But basically, proximity to the ruling elite determined whether you lived in poverty or whether you had at least some decent living standards. This mechanism persisted for several thousand years, from ancient empires to Rome to the Middle Ages. So societies were stuck in a Malthusian trap. In fact, the nobility created during medieval times and the fortunes some of them amassed back then still sees them, their descendants, at the top of income distributions to this very day. Gregory Clark's great book on social mobility shows that elite wealth tends to stay concentrated among the wealthiest families for up to 500 years. So the seeds of inequality we see today could have been planted a long, long time ago. Piketty testifies to this argument. He finds 18th and 19th century inequality was still driven by rentiers and incomes from capital, just like in all agricultural societies. The king and nobility owned 50-60% of all wealth, and the clergy and smaller noble houses owned the other 30-40%. The vast majority of the population owned almost nothing at all. Societies before the 20th century had entrenched elites that even revolutions couldn't take down. A good example here is China. Clark has shown that until this very day, the richest family of pre-communist revolution times are still among the richest families today, even in the top structures of the Communist Party. But in the 20th century, the structure started to change, as income from labor was becoming much more lucrative than income from capital. 2 world wars and the Great Depression of the 20th century ensured the downfall of the rentier society and took us to a society of superstars, or as Piketty coins the phrase, supermanagers. The elite structure had changed. It's no longer the kings and the aristocracy, but it's now corporate executives of global corporations and entrepreneurs that founded entire new industries. This is no doubt better than what we ever had in history. But the logic of elite network formation remains, which is why the root cause of inequality remains. Favors are still exchanged in the political landscape, and protection is still granted from politics. Supermanagers will often use their networks to get favorable legislation and regulations, and some of them will even finance NGOs and think tanks who promote their cause, for example, lowering taxation. So even though we got a different source of wealth, the incentive to preserve it and capitalize on it remained the same: proximity to power. The way a supermanager gains access to a politician is not for some crude institutional mechanism where more campaign spending is automatically transferred into favorable decisions. No, no, no. Influence is gradually constructed through a series of informal meetings and gatherings where favors are exchanged between powerful individuals. This is the foundation of an elite network. Okay, but if this effect is always there, if it's persistent, then how do we explain the cyclicality of inequality? I define two forces. One that pushes inequality up constantly. It's called the force of wealth concentration. And this one acts exactly just like I just described. And the other that pushes inequality down occasionally, which I call the force of occasional destruction. So Walter Scheidel has an excellent book on this, where he claims that inequality in history went down only during episodes of he calls them the four horsemen of the apocalypse: war, plague, state failure, and revolution. These were events that acted as significant levelers of inequality whenever they happened. And no other natural or social reform or natural order came even close to their effect. So yes, we don't always have high inequality in societies. We have episodes when it goes down abruptly and episodes where it grinds up gradually, hence the cyclicality. Does that mean that we have to accept this and only wait for a terrible event to disturb the forces of wealth concentration? Of course not. Subscribe to the channel, buy the book, read the book, and find out how we can take our societies beyond this cyclical trap. The first step is acceptance, right? Realizing that the root causes lie in political power, just like they always have.